Hi, this is Pat Iyer with Legal Nurse Podcast, and today we're going to be talking about money and why it's so important that you pay attention to your books and some tips on how you can manage your money and your cash flow. I have with me today Kathleen Thomas, who I met at a C-Suite Network Advisors event, which is a group that I'm involved in of people who help people in the C-suite, such as CEOs, CMOs, CFOs, CIOs. Anything you can put a C in front of is the C-suite. And Kathleen was there as a person who had just shared her knowledge with others by writing a book, which she was generous in giving out to the people who attended the conference. I got a copy of her book, and I remember walking up to her, it was just last month, I think, Kathleen, and saying that it would be great to have you on the podcast because our listeners are focused on how they can manage their money better. Kathleen has been working as a certified financial advisor and a chartered investment manager analyst for over 25 years from her office in southern New Hampshire. She's the author of the book that she handed to me, The Hardworking Woman's Guide to Money, and it's an excellent book. She also hosts a Money Matters podcast, so be sure to tune in for KT's Money Master podcast. Money Matters podcast. Let me be sure I've got that title correct. KT's Money Matters podcast, and she speaks on all topics related to money. We were discussing just before we started the recording that she competes in long-distance triathlons, and there's a picture on her wall behind her that was associated with one of the events that she took part in. She's been involved in 4 Ironman distance races, which makes me tired just to think about what's involved in that, including swimming, biking, and running. And her most famous quote, her favorite quote, is from Stephen Covey's book, Begin with the End in Mind. Kathleen Thomas, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me today.
Let's talk about some of the things that we should be focused on of setting some goals, some financial goals for our business. Now, I'm recording this in the middle of January. It'll probably be broadcast later in the spring. But right now, at this time of year, we're very focused on looking at the year ahead. What are some of the things from a financial standpoint that we should be thinking about when it comes to doing some planning related to money?
So I always think that there are 2 things that are kind of simultaneously happening in January. First, there's like a real accounting of what actually happened last year. You know, as you get ready to go to your accountant and you're trying to figure out how much money you actually made after you paid your expenses, how much money you actually net. And what I find is self-employed people love to talk about how much they gross. But a lot of times the backing into figuring out what you actually net, meaning after your expenses, how much income did you actually make, and what's that equate to, if you were working full-time in your business. And so part of it is figuring out what worked last year, and then what didn't work last year, what you thought could have worked better last year, and then what you're going to change this year based on what you learned from last year. So one of the things I always say is that, the reason why Covey's quote is my favorite is the idea of begin with the end in mind. It's that if we don't know where we're trying to go, we might get there. We might still get there. But along the way, there were a lot of little lefts and rights, and it's really easy to get distracted from the kind of big, grand idea that you had about how big your business was going to be or how many clients you were going to work with or what your revenue was going to be. And I always find that if I have a good plan of where I'm actually trying to get to, then I can map out what that road looks like. And then all year long, I just execute on that road.
That's a great
But January is about, taking inventory. What worked, what didn't, and based on that, what you're thinking about changing for next year.
There's so many aspects of what you just said that start wheels running in my mind. In a couple of days, we're going to be meeting with our accountant And I'm a person who tends to get distracted and to forget about the numbers piece and think that it's just running in the background. Legal nurse consultants love to analyze medical records. Some of us don't love to analyze our numbers. And you're pointing out how important it is to stay on top of it, to look at it from the perspective of what worked last year, what were the aspects of your business that were very profitable, where are your expenses high. You know, I love to go to conferences and to learn. Every time I do that, there's a plane fare, there's a hotel, there's food, there's transportation, there's the price of the conference. What am I going to get back as a result of being part of that conference? Looking at that big picture.
Yeah, and also, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I'm finished.
I was going to say that the other part that I think business owners don't think about is the time that they're spending at the conference that they otherwise could have made money on working in their business. So it's not just the tangible costs of being like at a conference where you're learning. So I always say I have to learn something I can implement, or I have to be getting CE credits, or ideally I have to be getting both. I have to be able to go someplace where I can fly fairly reasonably, stay reasonably, and maybe try to tag on something else. So in my particular business, I have clients all over the country. And so one of the things I try to do is, let's say I'm doing a conference in New York, like we were last month. I have a client in Long Island. I went and I had dinner with them on the night in between. Instead of kind of going out with a bunch of people and hanging out, which would have been terrific, I gave that up to go tag something else that made the trip make more sense to me financially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, when we met, you were handing out books. Tell us about your book. What caused you to write that book? What was behind your thought?
So there are two things about the Hardworking Woman's Guide to Money. And the first one is, I don't know about you, but I have never met a woman that's not working hard. Like, we have lots and lots of responsibilities in life, not just the job, but also the job of raising a family. Many of us are trying to get education. We're trying to take care of, both parents and children. And then, of course, there are the really ambitious of us that decide to go start a business and be self-employed in the middle of this whole thing. And so when I wrote this book, I thought about all the women I know that don't have any time to spend focusing on this. And what I wanted to do was create some tenets that said, if you think about how you want to make decisions financially up front, then you can use that as a roadmap when a decision comes along. Because often when a decision comes along, it's quick. Like, people decide to go on vacation and spend thousands of dollars pretty quickly without a lot of thought into it. People buy homes and automobiles in a day. They go in and make an offer. They drove by an open house. They weren't really thinking about buying it. And the next thing you know, they're talking about moving. And so people tend to be very spontaneous with very big decisions. And so part of what I talk about in the book is, first of all, knowing where you stand financially, like what makes sense for you and what doesn't, and understanding why certain decisions matter. So for me, I talk about like the 1, 2, 3 most important things. And for me, if I think about like the 1, 2, 3 most important things for me, I think I need to be able to sustain my lifestyle. I want to have a comfortable and happy retirement with my husband. And I financially want to be able to take care of the people in my life, my daughter and my nieces and my nephews, people who need me. And I want to be able to generate enough extra income that I'm able to do those. Those are my 3 things. Mm-hmm. And along the way, there are a lot of other little things that are important to me. But those 3 things are the 3 most important things. And so when something comes along that I'm not really thinking about, like, a big trip or a second house or whatever it is, it has to fit, understanding that those 3 things must be met first for me to feel like I'm doing what I need to do. And it just makes it easier to wave off things that aren't. I always say, like, I talk about the car in the book because the car is one of those expensive decisions that we make every 3 or 4 years across America. A lot of times we all finance. We pay a lot of money in interest. We pay a lot of money in payments for something we know is losing value. And so I talk in the book about the idea about knowing who you are and learning how to protect yourself. So as an example, you're going to go looking at cars and you're ready to buy a new car. And you want to come out with the best deal, but they're going to pressure you to sign the deal they want you to make today.
Mm-hmm.
What I talk about is don't go looking at your cars with your trade-in. That's all you have to do. You don't have your car with you. You can't complete the transaction. You've bought yourself 24 hours. And you can't, when they say, well, what can we do to get you to do it today? You say, I actually can't do it today because my car's not here. Why don't you tell me what you charge me for the car I'm trying to buy, what kind of interest rate, and then tomorrow I can come back with my trade and we can look at the trade and then talk about that. So all you're really doing is slowing the process down a little bit. And I think people get in there and society kind of makes you feel silly if you can't make a quick decision, like somehow you're just not bright enough. But you need to know that it's not about that. What they're really trying to do is get you to make a hasty decision, one that you may or may not have really wanted. And there's a lot of buyer's regret around major purchases. So I usually like little tips in the book to just slow you down a little bit so that your brain has time to catch up with your emotions and you can make the decision that actually really works for you.
There's a guy named Robert Cialdini who talks about the factors of persuasion. And one of them is urgency, which you're talking about. If you're involved in watching webinars or seeing emails, it's used all the time.
That's right.
You buy right now, you'll get a deal, this discount is going away. I use it myself. I think it's a fabulous factor. When you're talking about buying something like a car or a house or some expensive appliance, then there's a lot more at stake than buying an educational program that's going to improve your business. I think about my next door neighbor who for years scrimped money, and then when her husband died, she had a little pot of money. She was in the middle of school. She had no income, but she felt like she had deprived herself of being able to spend money for so long that when his money came in, she went wild. She
just went crazy with it.
She bought a dishwasher that's silent, and it cost a couple of $1,000s. There was nothing wrong with her other dishwasher, but she didn't like the noise. She spent money until finally she ended up
it was gone
at the brink of having to declare bankruptcy.
Right.
And it
sadly happens way more often than people think. And so what I really try to coach people to do is the idea of staying away from the edges, right? So there's I get anything I want whenever I want it, no matter what, because I need it. And emotionally I'm raw and I have to have it. And, the frugal Fanny, if you will, that never spends a dime on anything, that squeezes the last nickel out of their wallet, that never buys anything unless it's on sale, because that actually, for most of us, is really, really hard to be consistent about. I really believe in kind of like plan for the future, but live today, and finding where it is in the middle that you can afford to be. And so some people, don't have a lot of income. And then there are people that have tremendous income. And over the years in my practice, what I figured out is you could spend any amount of income. I think that people that have not ever made a lot of money, they think, no way. If I were making that kind of money, I would never have a problem. But what I'll say to you is, I always think back at 2008. So when the financial crisis happened, there were a number of big cases that came out about people, spending these ridiculous amount of money for things, and then they had to change it. There was the $6,000 shower curtain. This is what I remember. It was the guy that was the CEO of Tyco. So he was buying things and sending them to his New Hampshire address to avoid the sales tax, and then shipping him to his New York apartment. And one of the things on the list was the $6,000 shower curtain. And so what I'll say to you is, there is someone who will come up with something to help you part yourself from your money at any level. And you could spend it all, no matter what the amount is, because there are $6,000 shower curtains. So there are private jets. There are ways people that make a lot of money are easily parted with their wealth. In the same way, there are ways that People that are making less income can save. Like I used to read, there was this great book in the 90s called The Millionaire Next Door. And it was all about the habit of what make people successful financially. And part of it is they save a little bit of everything that they earn. They don't lie to themselves about what things cost. They save for things that they buy rather than financing things that they buy. So there's a little bit of willingness to have kind of a delayed gratification, not as much kind of instant charm. And they're always saving for retirement. A portion of everything that they make, they put away for the future. Not all of it, but a portion of it. And they do that consistently their whole life.
Do you find in your practice truth to the concept that people are not routinely saving for retirement? The majority of people don't have money enough to be able to retire. Is that true?
The majority of people, I think, are underestimating how long and expensive retirement will be. And then on the other side, we have the minority of super savers. That's what I'll call them, like the super savers. Those who are just hammering it. They are saving a lot of money. They are truly afraid that there won't be enough. But there's a whole portion of the population that really they don't think they're going to live long. Maybe somebody in their family died young. Maybe that, they don't have longevity in their family. Maybe they're a smoker and they say, oh, listen, I'm not going to live that long anyway. I only really need to think about money for 10 years, or I'm going to work a lot longer. I'm not going to retire. I'm never going to retire. I love working. And then all of a sudden something in their health changes or something in their life changes. So like back to the 2008 kind of financial meltdown, lots of people lost their jobs in their 50s and early 60s that weren't actually planning on retiring yet. And suddenly what happened is they actually got kind of forced into early retirement. And so part of being a little bit more ready than you think you need to be is knowing that last 5 years coming into retirement can be tricky because your health can change. Your employer could decide that they no longer need you. I always think about my clients who used to do things like typesetting, worked in the printing industry, did typesetting or art design, or people that did graphic design. A lot of those industries have gone away because of technology. And it's like, and how do they get themselves at age 55 or age 60 to a new career? It's very difficult. And people just assume they're going to be able to ride this thing to the end. And it just doesn't always go that way. So there are those maybe too prepared, those doing the right job. And then there are those who just, they can't figure out how not to withdraw money from their 401k, how not to borrow out of their IRA, never figured out how to pay themselves first, and can't seem to make that transition.
I know that you've observed in working with healthcare workers that having boundaries about money seems to be challenging to our profession. Can you give us some insight as to why that is?
Yeah, I find this in kind of all the caregiver industries. So when you are taking care of other people all the time and other people's needs, it takes a lot, both mentally, but very much emotionally. And so I always say my nurses are my worst savers. They mean to do the right thing, but they're easily distracted by other people and what they need. They feel like they're supposed to give everything of themselves to others. And as a result, they don't always do a really good job protecting themselves. Now, those in a traditional healthcare setting are sometimes protected, right? So if you're in a hospital, you have maybe a big pension or you've got a 403B and they're saving a lot of money for you. So they're helping you with the fact that you may be not as good about this as you should be. But when you cross over into that self-employed component, there is no one there doing anything for you but what you do for yourself. So it becomes even more important. But I talk a lot about it in the book about how women are more apt to lend money to a family member or a friend that they actually can't afford not to get back. They just can't afford it. They do it because they love this person and they say, well, this person is in worse shape than me and I should help them. And part of it is sometimes you're not in that position. So if you don't take care of yourself and you go to help somebody else, then the question becomes, who's going to take care of you when the time comes? Now, some people believe, circle of love, somebody will help me. If I help somebody else, it's all good. And what I'll say to you is that Not everybody's like this. And I think that healthcare professionals, more especially of the nurse genre, because you're caregivers. It's kind of in your bones. You don't become a nurse unless you've got that kind of caregiver DNA. And so one of the things I encourage my caregivers to do is to care about themselves too. And so that's where, like, understanding what you actually need, it helps you figure out what you actually can't afford to give away. And then I talk a little bit about, like, what happens when you lend money to relatives and they never pay you back. I always say that I think about it like if I'm lending money to somebody that I wonder will ever be able to pay me back. I say something like this. First, I don't lend money that I can't afford not to lose. But what I say to them is, I want you to know that I'm kind of uncomfortable with the idea of being the Thomas Bank and Trust, that I'm going to lend you this money. And if you never pay me back, I'm not going to stalk you for it, because I actually don't want that between us. But you should know that if you've never paid me back, then you can never ask me again to lend you more money.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what I've found. There are two kinds of relatives: those who pay me back and those that never get to ask again. And either way, I'm better off for it.
I'm thinking about a $10,000 loan that my son gave a friend of his to start a raw food restaurant in a small town in rural New Jersey.
Yeah.
Already a bad combination of
Right.
factors. And he got back, I think, $1,000 of it. It affected his friendship. They stopped being friends. But my son learned from that experience and never has taken that kind of business decision again, once having been burned by this. And
Yeah.
with his parents, we tried to tell him, please don't do this. But his friend said, oh, this is the last amount of money I need. And once I have this money, then I can open up the restaurant. And it was a good experience for my son to learn that lesson.
Well, and if he learns it over his lifetime, that money will turn out to be cheap. But the thing that I think is really difficult is that, first of all, what somebody's asking you to borrow the money for. Pay their light bill, pay their medical bill, pay their mortgage, start a business. If somebody's looking to start a business, what they're really looking for is investors, people that actually want to put the money in the business and leave it in the business, not their friends. And so, I think it's a fair line to say, really, this is the kind of thing you see a bank for. Or you should save more money if you're not ready. You should know that the best, the single biggest failure business is a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
They all have great ideas, but half of them fail in the first year. So, they're so undercapitalized because they come in, they don't have enough money to start, and they fail right away. You see it all the time. A little restaurant opens, 6 months later it's gone. 3 months later, another little restaurant's in there. That's gone too. That restaurants are a tough business to make money at. And so if your friend who's asking to borrow the money doesn't have any experience, you should say, no, protect yourself. Now, on the flip side, if somebody you love is losing their house because they've been sick or, they've lost their job or whatever it is, and you feel compelled to help them, then you need to know that they may not be able to pay you back right away. And you have to decide before you lend that money that you are okay with waiting, because if they had the money, they wouldn't have asked you to borrow it. So they're not going to magically come up with the money to pay you back.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, caregivers, they're an easy mark.
Well, and that was the point that I wanted to circle back to, which was that it's a challenge for us working with attorneys as caregivers, because we have what you described in different terms, that little hook in ourselves that says, oh, you need help. Let me help you.
That's right. Let me help you.
In our rush to help, sometimes we don't get the retainer, we don't get the invoice created right away. Then we end up waiting months to be paid and getting angry and frustrated because we're trying to collect money for the effort that we put into helping the attorney. So
right.
Give us any insight on how to think about that process differently.
So first thing I would say to you is that the attorney is always going to make sure the attorney gets paid. you should know that like they're a very different animal. They know how to bill. They don't talk to anyone without a retainer. They collect money on a regular basis and they charge for absolutely everything. So if you understand who they are, you should think about them more like a bank. So if you think about the lawyer rather than that nice lawyer that you like, that you do a lot of work with, you think about them, they are printing money, they are receiving money all the time, and you need to figure out how it is you get paid. So the first thing is, if they can charge a retainer, then what I would say to you is, you should charge an upfront fee, whether you think it's going to be half of what you think you'll bill over the time, or it's going to be, 25% so that you can start billing after that. But I would say some money up front because they are getting some money up front. Nobody is working for free except maybe you. And then the other thing is, I would say, is monthly billing, which is, I know it's a hassle. I know people hate it because it's a lot of paperwork and a lot of billing, but there's a lot of great software programs out there today that can help you generate these things much quicker. So whether you're generating the bills yourself, or you're hiring somebody who comes in and generates the bills for you, what I would say is, if you're not capable of billing on time, you'd be better off to pay somebody who will do your billing, because that money could be months and months of you chasing it. And during that time, you're working, you're frustrated about it, and you're having problems paying your own bills because somebody else is holding on to the money that you've already earned. And so this is about, when I say about putting yourself in the order of things you care about. So it's like you can care about the patient, you can care about your relationship with the attorney, but you also have to be able to care about yourself and your family. And if you're not doing that, sorry, I thought I shut that off. And if you're not doing that, that's not going to work for you.
Mm-hmm. I know that you've brought up a lot of questions in people's minds in sharing some of these concepts, and clearly this is an area where you have great expertise. What kinds of resources can you offer people who are interested in finding out more about what you do, what you can assist them with?
So first is, I have a book out there, retail, available on Amazon, The Hardworking Woman's Guide to Money. I wrote this book with the idea of all of us working a little too hard and needing some guidelines to kind of help us think about things. The book is broken down in two ways. One is it looks at ways to think about how you're going to make decisions about your money. And then also each chapter contains what I call some quick tips. So kind of like down and dirty, if you're trying to do this, what should you think about? If you're trying to finance a mortgage, what do you need to know? If you're trying to settle an estate, what do you need to know? If you're trying to plan for college, what should you be thinking about? How to talk to your children about what to save for college and what you're capable of doing. So that to kind of help you think about how you're making decisions. And then I also have a podcast. We talked about it a little earlier, KT's Money Matters, which is available on iTunes, Spotify, and anywhere else that you might want to download podcasts. Or you could go straight to the site, which is ktsmoneymatters.com. We also offer a personal financial planning practice. So New Day Solutions is my core company. I've been working with clients for 27 years. And then I have another advisor who's been with me for 12 years, Tammy Simons, and her and I do individual financial planning work with people really all over the country. So it really just depends upon what people need. Usually what I'd say to you is I would look at the book and I would sign up for the free podcast. I think about my podcast as being kind of like drive time financial advice, like 25 minutes maybe, learn something about money, like it, don't like it, just start learning a little bit about money and have it fit. And then ultimately, if you wanted to talk about your own finances, we certainly could do a consultation. There are also lots of great online tools today that exist to make your life easier. So things like NerdWallet and different kinds of sites that help you really look at where your money is going and what you're really spending on things. It's kind of a great way to start taking your inventory if you're kind of more of a do-it-yourselfer. Lots of those kind of tools. And the idea is ask for help if you need it. And if you think you can do this by yourself, make sure that you spend a little bit more time every week. It doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to read prospectuses of mutual funds, but a little bit of financial advice every week.
So we should stop burying our head in the sand sounds like.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
And Kathleen's website again is ktsmoneymatters.com. Kathleen, thank you so much. I know that we could go on for a lot longer discussing this topic, and I think you've given us some great resources and some things for us to think about in looking at our money mindset and how we value our work as legal nurse consultants helping attorneys.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
So this has been Pat Iyer and Kathleen Thomas talking about money and how it affects legal nurse consultants. Please be sure to tune in for our podcast again next week. We release a new interview every Monday, and we welcome your ideas and your thoughts and your suggestions for topics. You can reach me at patiyer@legalnursebusiness.com with whatever is on your mind. I'm happy to answer questions and appreciate you being part of the show. Thank you so much for listening.